Tycoon's ex-wife and twins returned to a lavish estate, stirring up the pain of abandonment. Is that really where Dad lives? Sophia whispered, her breath fogging up the glass. Camille swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Yes, sweetheart, that's where your father lives. As the car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance, Camille felt a wave of memories wash over her. Some bitter, some sweet, all tinged with a melancholy that threatened to overwhelm her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Mom! Lucas's voice was small, uncertain. Are you okay? Camille turned to face her children, struck once again by how much they resembled their father. I'm fine, darling. Just remembering. The front door of the manor swung open, and Richard Thornton himself stepped out onto the marble steps. He looked older than Camille remembered, lines etched around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there 8 years ago. For a moment, their eyes met, and Camille felt her heart stutter in her chest. Welcome back, Richard said, his deep voice carrying across the driveway. There was a hesitation in his tone, a flicker of something, regret, fear, in his eyes. Camille stepped out of the car, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. Hello, Richard, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The twins tumbled out after her, their eyes darting between their mother and the imposing figure of their father. Richard's gaze fell on them, and for a moment, his carefully composed expression cracked, revealing a mix of awe and heartbreak. Lucas, Sophia, he breathed, taking a halting step forward. Sophia, always the bolder of the two, stepped forward. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken words and buried emotions. As they stood there, the family reunited yet fractured. The weight of the past 8 years hung between them like a heavy curtain. Camille's eyes swept over the familiar facade of Thornton Manor, taking in the manicured lawns and opulent architecture. This place had once been her home, her prison, her heartbreak. Now, standing here with her children, she felt like an intruder in a life she'd left behind. Well, Richard said, clearing his throat, shall we go inside? I'm sure you're all tired from the journey. As they climbed the steps, Camille couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something much bigger than a simple family reunion. The doors of Thornton Manor closed behind them with a soft thud, sealing them in a world of luxury, secrets, and the pain of abandonment that still echoed through its halls. Richard cleared his throat, his deep voice echoing in the cavernous space. I hope you'll be comfortable here. Your rooms have been prepared on the east wing, overlooking the rose garden. Camille nodded stiffly, memories flooding back of countless lonely nights spent in those very rooms. Thank you, Richard. I'm sure it will be adequate. As they moved further into the house, a tall, distinguished man in an impeccable suit approached, tablet in hand. Mr. Thornton, I apologize for the interruption, but there's an urgent matter requiring your attention. The board is requesting an emergency meeting regarding the Shanghai merger. Richard's jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. Not now, James. I'm in the middle of... It's all right, Dad, Sophia piped up, her voice small but determined. We understand you're busy. The look that passed between father and daughter was laden with unspoken pain, a lifetime of missed moments and prioritized business deals. Richard hesitated, torn between his empire and the family he barely knew. Camille watched the internal struggle play out on her ex-husband's face, a mix of pity and resentment swirling in her chest. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Perhaps, she said coolly, you should take the call, Richard. We wouldn't want to interfere with your important business. The barb hit its mark. Richard flinched, then nodded curtly to his assistant. 5 minutes, James. That's all they get. As Richard strode away, his shoes clicking on the marble, Lucas tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mom, why does Dad seem so distant? Camille knelt down, cupping her son's face in her hands. Your father, he's a very important man, sweetheart. He's built an empire that spans the globe. Sometimes that comes at a cost. A cost to us? Sophia asked, her perceptive gaze fixed on the retreating figure of her father. Before Camille could answer, a warm, maternal voice interrupted. "Oh, my stars! Is that little Camille I see?" They turned to see Mrs. Hendricks, the elderly housekeeper, hurrying towards them with open arms. Her embrace enveloped Camille, bringing with it the scent of lemon polish and fresh-baked cookies, a comforting constant in a sea of change. "And these must be the little ones," Mrs. Hendricks exclaimed, her kind eyes crinkling as she smiled at the twins. "My, how you've grown!" As the children were swept up in Mrs. Hendricks' warmth, Camille found her gaze drawn to a large portrait hanging in the study across the hall. It depicted Richard, looking every inch the Tycoon, standing alone in front of Thornton Tower, the crown jewel of his business empire. The painting seemed to embody everything Richard had chosen over his family: success, power, isolation. Camille felt a lump form in her throat as she realized that even now, with his family finally under his roof, Richard was still choosing his empire over connection. The sound of Richard's voice drifted from his study, raised in tense negotiation. The twins exchanged a look, their excitement at exploring their father's world dimming slightly. Camille squared her shoulders, determined to shield her children from the pain of disappointment she knew all too well. "Come on, darlings," she said, forcing cheer into her voice. "Why, don't we go see those rooms of ours? I bet the view of the rose garden is just as beautiful as I remember." As they climbed the grand staircase, Camille couldn't shake the feeling that they were ascending into a world of gilt-edged loneliness. The question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. In a house this grand, with a man so focused on his empire, was there truly room for a family to heal and grow? She paused in front of a heavy oak door, her hand hesitating on the brass handle. Taking a deep breath, Camille pushed it open, revealing a room that was both achingly familiar and jarringly different. "This was my room," she said softly, stepping inside. The twins followed, wide-eyed and curious. The space was immaculate, as if frozen in time. The same delicate floral wallpaper, the same four-poster bed with its canopy of silk. But there were changes, too small, almost imperceptible alterations that spoke volumes. The vanity where Camille had spent countless hours was bare of personal items. The bookshelves, once filled with her favorite novels, now held leather-bound business journals. Sophia ran her hand over the smooth surface of the vanity. "Mom, did you really live here?" Camille nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I did, sweetheart, for 5 years. Lucas, always the more perceptive of the twins, caught the hint of sadness in his mother's voice. "But you weren't happy here, were you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Camille sank onto the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. The twins climbed up, one on either side, their warmth a comfort against the chill of memories. "It's complicated," Camille began, choosing her words carefully. "Your father and I, we loved each other very much in the beginning. But sometimes, love isn't enough." She closed her eyes, and suddenly she was 25 again, full of hope and dreams, walking into this room for the first time as Richard Thornton's bride. "I thought this place was a fairy tale come true," she murmured, more to herself than to the children. "But fairy tales don't tell you about the loneliness, the pressure, the way a golden cage can slowly suffocate you." Sophia leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "Is that why you left, Mom?" Camille's eyes snapped open, the pain of that decision still raw after all these years. "I left because I had to, my loves. For my sake, and for yours." She stood abruptly, moving to the large bay window that overlooked the rose garden. The roses were in full bloom, their heady scent drifting up even through the closed glass. It was here, among these very roses, that she had told Richard she was pregnant with twins. His response, a distracted nod before returning to his phone call, had been the first crack in her fairy tale illusion. "Your father," Camille said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's a brilliant man. He can see possibilities in the business world that others can't even imagine. But that brilliance, it comes at a cost. He struggles to see the small, precious moments that make up a life. A family. Lucas joined her at the window, his small hand slipping into hers. But he asked us to come back. That means he wants to try, doesn't it? Camille looked down at her son, seeing Richard's determination reflected in those young eyes. I hope so, darling. I truly hope so. As the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the immaculate lawn, Camille felt a familiar restlessness stirring in her chest. The same feeling that had driven her to pack her bags in the dead of night 8 years ago, with 2 sleeping infants and a heart full of shattered dreams. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. A soft knock at the door startled them all. Mrs. Hendricks poked her head in, her kind face creased with concern. I'm sorry to intrude, dears, but Mr. Thornton asked me to inform you that dinner will be served in an hour. He hopes you'll join him in the formal dining room. As the door closed behind the housekeeper, Camille turned to her children, seeing a mix of excitement and apprehension on their faces. The first family dinner in this house, a house that had never truly known the warmth of family. Well, she said, forcing a smile, shall we get ready to face the lion in his den? As they began to unpack, choosing outfits for dinner, Camille couldn't shake the feeling that this meal would be more than just a reunion. It would be a reckoning with the past, with broken promises, and with the possibility of a future none of them had dared to imagine. The Thornton Manor, with all its grandeur and painful memories, seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if the wounds of abandonment could truly be healed. Mom, can we look around a bit before dinner? Sophia asked, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her new dress. Camille hesitated, memories of stern warnings and off-limits areas flashing through her mind. But the eager faces of her children melted her resolve. All right, but stay together and don't touch anything. This isn't like home. The twins nodded solemnly before dashing out of the room, their footsteps echoing down the long hallway. Camille sighed, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. At least they would have each other to navigate this gilded labyrinth. Lucas and Sophia crept down the grand staircase, their eyes wide as they took in the opulent surroundings. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting dancing lights across marble floors and priceless artwork. Look at that, Lucas whispered, pointing to a suit of armor standing guard in an alcove. Do you think it's real? Sophia shrugged, her attention caught by a partially open door at the end of the hallway. Let's check in there, she said, tugging her brother's sleeve. They tiptoed towards the door, hearts pounding with the thrill of exploration. As they peered inside, they found themselves in what appeared to be a study. Dark wood paneling lined the walls and a massive desk dominated the center of the room. Whoa, Lucas breathed, taking in the collection of model ships displayed on shelves. Dad must really like boats. Sophia, meanwhile, had gravitated towards a wall covered in framed photographs. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the images. Lucas, come look at this. The photographs chronicled their father's rise to success. Richard shaking hands with world leaders, cutting ribbons at grand openings, standing proudly in front of towering skyscrapers. But something was missing. There's no pictures of us, Lucas said quietly, his voice tinged with hurt. Or Mom. Sophia's fingers traced the edge of a frame, showing a much younger Richard receiving some kind of award. Do you think he forgot about us? Before Lucas could answer, a glint of metal caught his eye. Tucked behind a stack of books on the desk was a small silver picture frame. With trembling hands, he picked it up. The photograph inside showed their mother, younger and radiant, cradling 2 newborns. Richard stood beside her, his usual stern expression softened by a hint of a smile. He didn't forget, Lucas whispered, showing the picture to his sister. He just hid us away. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them jump. Quickly, Lucas returned the frame to its hiding spot, and the twins scurried out of the study, their minds whirling with questions. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Mrs. Hendricks. The kindly housekeeper's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. Exploring, are we? She asked, a gentle smile on her face. This old house has many secrets, but some are best left undiscovered. Come along now, it's almost time for dinner. As Mrs. Hendricks led them back towards the main staircase, Sophia couldn't help but ask, "Mrs. Hendricks, why doesn't Dad have any pictures of us out?" The housekeeper's step faltered for just a moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully measured. "Your father, he keeps his most precious things close to his heart, dears. Sometimes that means hiding them away where they can't be hurt." Lucas and Sophia exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. Their father was a mystery, a puzzle they were only just beginning to unravel. As they climbed the stairs to rejoin their mother, the twins felt the weight of their discovery settling on their young shoulders. The Thornton Manor, with all its grandeur and hidden corners, suddenly seemed less like a fairy tale castle and more like a fortress guarding painful secrets. The impending dinner loomed before them, no longer just a meal but a chance to peer behind the carefully constructed facade of Richard Thornton. As they reached the landing, they could hear their mother's voice drifting from their room, a lifeline in this unfamiliar world. Lucas squeezed his sister's hand. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we stick together, okay?" Sophia nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Always." With one last glance at the sprawling estate below, the twins stepped back into their room, ready to face whatever the evening might bring. The Thornton Manor held its breath, waiting to see if the curiosity of two children could begin to mend the fractures of a broken family. The grand double doors of the dining room swung open, revealing a scene of opulent formality. A long mahogany table stretched before them, set with gleaming silver and delicate china. Richard stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. But it was the faces of the staff that truly caught Camille's attention. As they entered, a ripple of emotion passed through the assembled servants. Some eyes lit up with genuine warmth, while others darted away, heavy with unspoken tension. Mrs. Hendricks stepped forward, her weathered hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "We've missed you terribly." Before Camille could respond, a younger maid, barely more than a girl, burst out, "Oh, it's so wonderful to have you back. The house has been so empty without." "That's quite enough, Sarah." The butler, Mr. Jameson, cut in sharply. His stern gaze softened as it fell on Camille and the twins. "What she means to say is, we're pleased to have you with us, madam." "Children." Camille felt a lump form in her throat at the genuine affection in Mrs. Hendricks' eyes, even as she noted the careful neutrality of Mr. Jameson's tone. These people had been more than staff. They had been her confidants, her support system in the lonely years of her marriage. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "It's good to see you all again." Richard cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the cavernous room. "Yes, well, shall we sit? I'm sure you're all hungry after your journey." As they took their seats, Camille couldn't help but notice the subtle dance of the staff around Richard. They moved with practiced efficiency, but there was a wariness in their movements, as if they were navigating a minefield. Lucas, ever observant, leaned in to whisper to his mother, "Why does everyone seem so nervous around Dad?" Before Camille could formulate a response, Richard's voice cut through the air. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting our new staff members," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Sarah, was it?" The young maid froze, her face paling. "Why, yes, Mr. Thornton. I started here 6 months ago." "I see," Richard mused, swirling the liquid in his glass. "And you find the house empty without my wife and children?" The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Mrs. Hendricks stepped forward, her normally warm voice taking on a protective edge. "Sarah is still learning the ways of the house, sir." She meant no disrespect. Richard's gaze lingered on the trembling maid for a moment longer before he nodded curtly. "Of course. Well, let's hope their presence brings some much-needed life back to these halls, shall we?" As the first course was served, Camille caught the eye of Mr. Jameson. The old butler's face was a mask of professionalism, but she could see the apology in his eyes. Some things, it seemed, hadn't changed in her absence. Sophia, sensing the undercurrent of tension, attempted to lighten the mood. "This soup is delicious. Don't you think so, Dad?" Richard blinked, as if surprised to be addressed directly by his daughter. "Yes, it's a very good. Chef Martin has always excelled at bisques." A flicker of something, pride, nostalgia, passed over his face. "Your mother used to love his lobster bisque. Do you remember, Camille? That dinner party for the governor?" For a moment, the years seemed to fall away. Camille saw a glimpse of the man she had fallen in love with, hidden beneath layers of corporate armor. "I do," she said softly. "It was a lovely evening." The twins exchanged a look, hope blossoming in their eyes. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. Richard's phone buzzed insistently, and his attention was once again drawn away from his family. As the meal progressed, the delicate dance continued. The staff moved around them like silent ghosts, their loyalty divided between the master they served and the mistress they had missed. Camille felt the weight of unspoken words, of allegiances tested and bonds strained by her long absence. In the kitchen, beyond the swinging doors, whispered conversations flew back and forth. "Can you believe they're really back? Hush, you know he doesn't like us talking about family matters. But surely this changes things? Maybe he'll be different now." Back in the dining room, Lucas and Sophia watched the interactions with growing fascination. They were beginning to understand that Thornton Manor was more than just a house. It was a complex ecosystem of relationships and hidden currents, with their father at the center of it all. As dessert was served, Camille caught Mrs. Hendrick's eye once more. The old housekeeper gave her a small, encouraging smile, as if to say, "We're all rooting for you, dear." In that moment, Camille realized that she and her children weren't just navigating Richard's world. They were stepping into a battlefield of old loyalties and new hopes. The staff of Thornton Manor, it seemed, had been waiting for this reunion just as much as they had. The question that hung in the air, unspoken but palpable, was whether Richard Thornton was ready to embrace the change his family's return would bring to the carefully ordered world he had built in their absence. "Camille," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Children, I suppose you're wondering why I asked you to come here." Lucas and Sophia straightened in their chairs, exchanging quick glances. Camille felt her heart rate quicken, bracing herself for whatever was to come. Richard took a deep breath, his usual mask of corporate confidence slipping for a moment. "The truth is, I need your help." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Camille's eyebrows shot up in surprise. In all their years of marriage, she had never heard Richard Thornton admit to needing help from anyone. "What kind of help, Dad?" Sophia asked, her voice small but steady. Richard's eyes darted to his phone, which had been buzzing intermittently throughout the meal. "The company is facing some challenges. Challenges that could have significant repercussions for all of us." Camille felt a flicker of anger. "And you thought bringing us back into your life would somehow fix your business problems?" she asked, her tone sharp. "No. Well, not exactly," Richard fumbled, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's more complicated than that. There are legal issues that involve our family structure." Lucas leaned forward, his young face creased with concern. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" "No, son, you're not in trouble," Richard assured him quickly. "But the company, our way of life, it's all at risk unless we can present a united front." Camille's mind raced, piecing together the implications. "You want us to play happy families for your board of directors?" she asked incredulously. Richard winced at her blunt assessment. "It's not just about appearances, Camille. There are clauses in the company charter tied to family ownership and control. Without you and the children here, I could lose everything I've built." The twins looked between their parents, confusion and worry etched on their faces. Sophia spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "But we just got here. We don't know anything about your company or how to help." Richard's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "You don't have to do anything, sweetheart. Just be here. Be a family. That's all I'm asking." Camille felt a maelstrom of emotions swirling inside her: anger at being manipulated, pity for the desperation she saw in Richard's eyes, and a deep, aching sadness for the broken family they had become. "And what happens after you've sorted out your legal troubles?" she asked quietly. "Do we just pack up and leave again, like we were never here?" The question seemed to strike Richard like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, at a loss for words. It was Mrs. Hendricks who broke the tense silence, stepping forward with a steaming pot of tea. "Perhaps this is a conversation best continued in the study," she suggested gently, with something warm to soothe the nerves. As they rose from the table, the weight of Richard's request settling heavily on their shoulders, Lucas tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "are we going to stay?" Camille looked down at her son, seeing the mix of hope and fear in his eyes. She then glanced at Richard, who stood awkwardly by the door, a man caught between his empire and his family. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered honestly. "I think we have a lot to talk about." As they made their way to the study, the Thornton Manor seemed to hold its breath. The grand halls echoed with the footsteps of a family teetering on the edge of reconciliation or final separation. The staff exchanged worried glances, the fate of their own livelihoods tied inextricably to the outcome of this fraught family reunion. In the shadowy corners of the manor, old ghosts stirred memories of happier times, of broken promises, of a love that had once seemed unshakable. And as Richard closed the study door behind them, shutting out the watching eyes of the household, one question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. Could the bonds of family, stretched thin by years of absence and hurt, be strong enough to withstand the storms ahead? Or would the Thornton empire crumble, taking with it the last hope of healing the wounds of abandonment that had brought them all to this moment? For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantel, each second stretching out like an eternity. Finally, Richard turned to face his family, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "I know this isn't fair," he began, his voice low and strained, "asking you to come back after everything." Camille's eyes flashed with a mixture of pain and anger. "No, Richard, it isn't fair. You can't just summon us back into your life like we're some sort of corporate asset to be deployed at will." Richard flinched at her words, taking a long sip of his drink before responding. "You're right. I've handled this all wrong. But you have to understand, the stakes." "The stakes?" Camille interrupted, her voice rising. "What about the stakes for our children, Richard? Do you have any idea what it's been like for them, growing up without a father?" The twins shifted uncomfortably, caught in the crossfire of their parents' emotions. Sophia, always the braver of the two, spoke up. "Dad, why didn't you ever visit us? Or call?" The question hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken hurt. Richard's composure cracked, revealing a vulnerability that startled them all. I didn't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every time I thought about reaching out, I was paralyzed by the fear that you'd reject me, that I'd see in your eyes how much I'd failed as a father." Lucas, his young face etched with a wisdom beyond his years, asked, "But isn't trying and failing better than not trying at all?" Richard's eyes met his son's, and for a moment, the resemblance between them was startling. "You're right, son. I've been a coward, hiding behind my work, convincing myself that providing for you financially was enough." Camille felt a lump form in her throat, memories of their early years together flooding back. "It was never about the money, Richard. We just wanted you. Your time, your attention, your love." The word love seemed to echo in the room, stirring up emotions long buried. Richard set down his glass and moved closer to his family, hesitating before perching on the edge of the coffee table in front of them. "I know I have no right to ask this of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm praying that you'll give me a chance to make things right. Not just for the sake of the company, but for us, for our family." Sophia, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, asked the question they were all thinking. "How do we know you mean it this time?" How do we know you won't just get busy with work and forget about us again? Richard reached out, gently taking his daughter's hand in his. The contact seemed to surprise them both. I can't change the past, he said softly. But I promise you here and now that if you give me this chance, I will do everything in my power to be the father you deserve, the husband you deserved, he added, meeting Camille's gaze. Camille felt her resolve wavering. The man before her was so different from the cold, distant figure she'd left behind 8 years ago. There was a rawness to him now, a vulnerability that both touched and terrified her. It won't be easy, she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. There's so much hurt, so much lost time. Richard nodded, a glimmer of hope lighting his eyes. I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, family counseling, stepping back from work, anything. The twins looked up at their mother, their expressions a mix of hope and apprehension. In that moment, Camille realized the weight of the decision resting on her shoulders. It wasn't just about her and Richard anymore. It was about giving her children the chance at the family they'd always longed for. Taking a deep breath, Camille spoke, her voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions inside her. We'll stay, she said, for now. But Richard, this is your last chance. If you let us down again. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung in the air, understood by all. Richard nodded solemnly, relief and determination warring on his face. I understand. Thank you, Camille. Thank you all. As the family sat there, the tension slowly ebbing away, replaced by a cautious optimism, the Thornton Manor seemed to exhale. The first step had been taken on a long and uncertain path towards healing. Outside the study door, Mrs. Hendricks wiped away a tear, hope blooming in her heart for the family she'd watched fracture all those years ago. And in the deepening twilight, the rose garden that had witnessed so much pain began to stir with the promise of new beginnings. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles both external and internal. But for the first time in years, the Thorntons faced it together, as a family fragile, flawed, but united in their desire to mend what had been broken. It was on a particularly warm afternoon that Camille found herself drawn to the manor's vast library. The room had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in worlds far removed from the gilded cage of her marriage. As she ran her fingers along the spines of familiar books, a flash of white caught her eye. Tucked between 2 leather-bound volumes was an envelope, yellowed with age. Her heart racing, Camille pulled it out, immediately recognizing Richard's bold handwriting. It was addressed to her, dated just weeks after she had left with the twins. With trembling hands, she opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. As she read, her face drained of color, and she sank into a nearby armchair, the letter clutched to her chest. Mom! Sophia's voice startled her. The girl stood in the doorway, concern etched on her young face. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Camille tried to compose herself, but her voice wavered as she spoke. Sweetheart, I found something that changes everything. Sophia moved closer, her curiosity piqued. What is it? Before Camille could respond, Richard's voice boomed from the hallway. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. We need to discuss the upcoming board meeting and... He stopped short as he entered the library, his eyes locking onto the letter in Camille's hands. The color drained from his face. Where did you find that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Camille stood, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and hurt. You wrote this, Richard, 8 years ago. A letter explaining everything, the threats to the company, the reason you pushed us away. You begged me to come back, said you'd explain it all. Richard stumbled back as if he'd been struck. I never sent it. I couldn't risk. Risk what? Camille demanded, her voice rising. Risk us knowing the truth? Risk us understanding why you became so cold, so distant. Sophia looked between her parents, confusion and fear warring on her face. Dad? What's going on? Richard sank into a chair, suddenly looking every bit his age. It was never supposed to be like this, he murmured. I thought I was protecting you all. Camille's anger softened slightly at the defeated slump of his shoulders. Protecting us from what, Richard? What was so terrible that you had to push your family away? He looked up, his eyes haunted. There were people, powerful people, who wanted to take control of the company. They threatened to hurt you and the children if I didn't comply. I thought if I distanced myself, made it seem like I didn't care, you'd be safe. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sophia gasped, her young mind struggling to process the implications. Camille's voice was barely audible when she spoke again. But the letter, you wanted us to come back. What changed? Richard's gaze dropped to his hands. I was weak. I convinced myself it was better this way, that you were safer without me. But the truth is, I was a coward. I couldn't face what I'd done. Couldn't risk losing you all over again if you knew the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Camille's mind raced, reevaluating every memory, every hurt, in light of this new information. Sophia stood frozen, torn between the urge to comfort her father and the shock of the secrets unraveling before her. Finally, Camille spoke, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. We need to talk, Richard. All of us. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If we're going to have any chance of moving forward as a family, we need to lay everything on the table. Richard nodded, a mix of relief and trepidation on his face. You're right. This time I told you everything. But Camille, you have to understand, the danger. It might not be over. As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the foyer. Raised voices and the sound of breaking glass shattered the tense atmosphere. Richard was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between his family and the door. Stay here, he ordered, his voice low and urgent. Lock the door behind me. Whatever you hear, don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Before Camille could protest, Richard was gone, the library door clicking shut behind him. She moved quickly to lock it, then gathered Sophia in her arms, both of them trembling. Mom, Sophia whispered, her voice small and frightened. What's happening? Camille stroked her daughter's hair, her eyes fixed on the door. I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever it is, we'll face it together. As a family. Outside, the sounds of conflict grew louder. The Thornton Manor, once a symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a fortress under siege. And as Camille held her daughter close, she realized that the path to healing their family had just become far more treacherous than she could have ever imagined. The secrets of the past were unraveling, and with them, the fragile peace they had begun to build. But in the face of this new threat, one thing was clear: the bonds of family, tested by time and trauma, would be their greatest strength in the battles to come. Mom! Sophia, are you in there? Lucas's voice, tinged with panic, called out. Camille rushed to the door, her heart pounding. Lucas, we're here. Are you all right? I'm fine, but Dad. He's talking to some scary-looking men in the foyer. He told me to find you and stay put. With shaking hands, Camille unlocked the door, pulling Lucas inside before quickly securing it again. The three of them retreated to the far corner of the library, seeking refuge among the towering bookshelves. What did you see? Sophia whispered to her brother, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Lucas swallowed hard, his young face pale. There were three men in suits. They looked really angry. Dad was trying to calm them down, but one of them knocked over that big vase in the entryway. That's when Dad saw me and told me to run. Camille's mind raced. The threat Richard had spoken of was no longer a distant memory but a present danger. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Children, listen to me. We need to be very quiet and very brave. Your father, he's trying to protect us. From what, Mom? Lucas asked, his voice trembling. Before Camille could answer, the sound of raised voices drifted through the door. You can't hide them forever, Thornton, a gruff voice shouted. The board meeting is in 2 days. If your family doesn't make an appearance, the deal is off, and you know what that means. Richard's response was too low to hear, but the menace in the stranger's voice was clear. Maybe we need to send a stronger message. Remind you of what's at stake. The twins clung to Camille, their bodies shaking. She held them close, her mind frantically searching for a way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, a new voice joined the fray, the stern, authoritative tone of Mr. Jameson, the butler. Gentlemen, I must insist that you leave the premises immediately. The police have been notified. A tense silence followed, broken by the sound of retreating footsteps and a slammed door. Moments later, a gentle knock on the library door made them all jump. Mrs. Thornton? Children, it's safe to come out now, Mr. Jameson called softly. Camille approached the door cautiously. Richard? Is he? I'm here, Camille. Richard's voice came through, sounding weary but unharmed. It's over, for now. As Camille opened the door, she was struck by the sight of her ex-husband. Richard looked disheveled, his normally impeccable suit wrinkled, a bruise forming on his cheek. But it was the look in his eyes that truly shook her, a mixture of fear, determination, and something else, regret. Dad! The twins rushed forward, embracing their father tightly. Richard knelt down, holding them close, his composure cracking as he murmured reassurances. Camille watched the scene unfold, her emotions a turbulent mix of relief, anger, and confusion. As Richard stood, his eyes met hers over the children's heads. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. The time for secrets was over. We need to talk, Camille said firmly. All of us. Now. Richard nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly. You're right. Let's go to my study. Jameson, please ensure we're not disturbed. As they made their way through the manor, Camille couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in the atmosphere. The staff moved with heightened alertness, and even the grand paintings on the walls seemed to watch them with wary eyes. Once in the study, Richard closed the door and moved to the large window overlooking the grounds. For a long moment he stood in silence, his back to his family. When he finally turned to face them, his expression was one of a man preparing for battle. What I'm about to tell you will change everything, he began, his voice low and intense. But you need to know the truth. All of it. The twins settled onto the leather sofa, their young faces a mix of fear and determination. Camille remained standing, her arms crossed, bracing herself for whatever revelations were to come. Richard took a deep breath, his gaze moving from Camille to the children and back again. It all started 10 years ago, with a discovery that could have changed the world. As Richard began his tale, the study seemed to fade away, replaced by the weight of long-buried secrets finally coming to light. The Thornton family stood on the precipice of a truth that would test their newfound bonds, challenge their understanding of the past, and potentially put them all in grave danger. The manor held its breath, the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel marking each moment as the story of betrayal, sacrifice, and hidden motives unfolded. And through it all, one question burned in Camille's mind. Would the truth be enough to heal the wounds of the past, or would it tear their fragile family apart once and for all? Camille's eyes widened, realization dawning. The patent application that disappeared. The one you obsessed over for months. That was it, wasn't it? Richard nodded, his face etched with regret. I thought I could fight them, Camille. I thought if I just pushed hard enough, worked long enough, I could overcome their influence. But then, his voice trailed off, and he glanced at the twins, who were listening with rapt attention. Sophia, ever perceptive, spoke up. Then they threatened us, didn't they, Dad? Richard's composure cracked, a single tear trailing down his cheek. Yes, sweetheart. They made it clear that if I didn't back down, if I didn't bury the technology, you and your brother, your mother, you'd all be in danger. Lucas, his young face contorted with a mix of anger and confusion, burst out. But why didn't you tell us? Why did you push us away instead of explaining? Because I was a coward, Richard admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I distanced myself, if I made you all hate me, you'd be safer. They'd have no reason to come after you. Camille felt her heart constrict, years of pain and resentment warring with this new understanding. "Oh, Richard," she breathed. "You fool. We could have faced this together." Richard met her gaze, his eyes pleading. "I know that now, but at the time I couldn't bear the thought of putting you in harm's way. I thought I was protecting you all." Sophia, always the more emotionally intuitive of the twins, stood up and approached her father. "But you were hurting too, weren't you, Dad?" All this time, Richard knelt down, gently taking his daughter's hands in his. "Every day, sweetheart, being away from you, from all of you, it was like living with half my heart missing." The room fell silent, the weight of revelation settling over them all. Camille found herself moving closer, drawn by the raw vulnerability in Richard's confession. "So what's changed?" she asked softly. "Why bring us back now?" Richard stood, running a hand through his hair. "The technology, it's resurfaced. A young engineer in our R&D department stumbled upon the old files, started asking questions. And now, the same people who threatened us before, they're back. They're demanding that I turn over everything related to the project. Or what, Dad?" Lucas pressed, his voice tight with worry. "Or they'll take control of the company," Richard finished. "And if that happens, there's no telling what they might do to cover their tracks, to silence anyone who knows about the technology." Camille's mind raced, piecing together the implications. "The board meeting in 2 days. That's the deadline, isn't it?" Richard nodded grimly. "If I can't prove that the company is stable, that the succession plan is secure with you and the children here, they'll have the leverage they need to force me out." A tense silence fell over the room as the full gravity of the situation sank in. The twins exchanged worried glances, while Camille's thoughts whirled with a mix of fear, anger, and an unexpected surge of protectiveness. Finally, Sophia spoke up, her young voice filled with a determination that belied her years. "So what do we do? How do we fight back?" Richard looked at his daughter with a mix of pride and concern. "It's not that simple, sweetheart. These people are powerful, dangerous. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, Dad," Lucas interjected, standing up to join his sister. "We're offering. We're a family, right? That means we face things together." Camille felt a swell of emotion at her children's bravery. She moved to stand beside them, facing Richard. "They're right. You tried to handle this alone once, and look where it got us. This time, we do it as a family." Richard's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he looked at the three of them, united before him. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. "After everything I've put you through." "Maybe not," Camille agreed, her voice soft but firm. "But that's what family is, Richard. It's being there for each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." As they stood there, the Thornton family united for the first time in years, a spark of hope ignited in the face of the looming danger. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with risks and potential heartbreak. But in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of newfound understanding and rekindled bonds, they felt a strength that had long been absent. Richard squared his shoulders, a look of determination replacing the guilt and fear that had haunted his features. "All right," he said, his voice gaining strength. "If we're going to do this, we need a plan, and we need to move fast." As the family began to strategize, the study buzzed with a nervous energy. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds of Thornton Manor. The coming days would test their resolve, their ingenuity, and the strength of their newly forged family bonds. But for now, in the fading light of day, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. The Thorntons were no longer a fractured family hiding from their past. They were a united front, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The soft crunch of gravel alerted her to another's presence. She turned to see Mrs. Hendricks approaching, a steaming mug of tea in her weathered hands. "I thought you might need this, dear," the housekeeper said softly, offering Camille the mug. "It's your favorite chamomile with a touch of honey." Camille accepted the tea gratefully, inhaling its soothing aroma. "Thank you, Mrs. Hendricks. You always seem to know exactly what I need." The older woman's eyes crinkled with a mixture of affection and concern. It's my job to know, Mrs. Thornton. Or, should I say Miss Camille now? Camille sighed, her gaze drifting to the rose bushes she and Richard had planted together in happier times. I'm not sure what to call myself anymore, to be honest. Everything's changed so quickly. Mrs. Hendricks nodded sympathetically. Change can be difficult, my dear, but sometimes it's necessary for growth. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. If you don't mind my saying so, I've seen a spark in Mr. Thornton's eyes these past few days that I haven't seen in years. Having you and the children here, it's brought him back to life. Camille felt a lump form in her throat. I want to believe that, Mrs. Hendricks. I want to believe that we can rebuild what we've lost. But after everything that's happened, it won't be easy, the housekeeper agreed. But the best things in life rarely are. You and Mr. Thornton, you built something beautiful once. And from what I've seen, there's still a foundation there, waiting to be rebuilt upon. As they stood in companionable silence, the sound of laughter drifted from the direction of the manor. Camille turned to see Richard chasing the twins across the lawn, all three of them in their pajamas, their faces alight with joy. The sight stirred something deep within Camille, a longing for the family they could have been, the family they might still become. As Richard caught up to the children, scooping them both into his arms, his eyes met Camille's across the garden. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the years of pain and separation melting away in the warmth of his gaze. Mrs. Hendricks gave Camille's arm a gentle squeeze. Sometimes, my dear, the heart sees what is invisible to the eye. Don't be afraid to trust it. With those words, the housekeeper retreated, leaving Camille alone with her thoughts and the scene unfolding before her. Richard set the children down and said something to them, gesturing towards Camille. The twins nodded eagerly and began making their way across the lawn, with Richard following close behind. As they approached, Camille felt her heart racing. This moment felt pivotal, as if the future of their family hung in the balance. Mom! Sophia called out, her face flushed with excitement. Dad's going to show us how to play croquet. Will you join us? Lucas chimed in, his eyes sparkling with hope. Please, Mom? It'll be fun. Like a real family, Camille felt, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She looked at Richard, who stood a few paces behind the children, his expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. What do you say, Camille? He asked softly. Shall we give it a try? In that moment, Camille saw not just the man who had hurt her, but the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. She saw the father her children deserved, the partner she had longed for. And despite the challenges that lay ahead, despite the wounds that were still healing, she felt a flicker of hope ignite in her heart. Taking a deep breath, Camille set down her mug and smiled. I'd love to, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. But I should warn you all, I was quite the croquet champion in college. Richard's face broke into a grin, relief and joy mingling in his eyes. Is that a challenge, Mrs. Thornton? The use of her married name sent a shiver down Camille's spine. It felt both foreign and familiar, a reminder of what they had lost and what they might yet reclaim. As the family made their way to the croquet lawn, the air around them seemed charged with possibility. The wounds of the past were still there, the challenges of the future still loomed. But in this moment, they were simply a family enjoying a beautiful morning together. Mrs. Hendricks watched from a window, a knowing smile on her face. The road ahead would not be easy, but the first steps had been taken. And sometimes, she knew, that was all it took to change the course of a family's destiny. I can't believe you beat me, Richard chuckled, shaking his head in mock disbelief. I'd forgotten how competitive you can be. Camille raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk tugging at her lips. Perhaps you've just gotten rusty, spending all your time in boardrooms instead of on croquet lawns. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years seemed to fall away. The connection between them, once thought lost, crackled with renewed energy. But the moment was shattered by the sharp ring of Richard's phone. His face fell as he glanced at the screen. I'm sorry, I have to take this. It's the office. As Richard stepped away to answer the call, Camille felt a familiar pang of disappointment. Some things, it seemed, never changed. She turned to the twins, forcing a smile. "Why don't you two go get cleaned up for lunch? I'm sure Mrs. Hendricks has something delicious planned." Once the children were out of earshot, Camille found herself drawn to Richard's tense figure at the edge of the lawn. His voice, low and urgent, carried on the breeze. "No, absolutely not. I won't be pressured into this decision. The board meeting is tomorrow and I intend to—" He broke off, noticing Camille's approach. "I have to go. We'll discuss this later." As he ended the call, Richard's shoulders sagged, the weight of his burdens visible in every line of his body. Camille hesitated, torn between the instinct to comfort him and the memory of all the times his work had come between them. "Bad news?" she asked softly. Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Camille's heart ache. "It's Victor Blackwood. He's making his move earlier than we anticipated. He's calling for an emergency board meeting this afternoon." Camille felt her stomach drop. "But we're not ready. We haven't had time to—" "I know," Richard interrupted, his voice tight with frustration. "He's trying to catch us off guard. Force my hand before we can present a united front." For a moment, they stood in tense silence, the perfect morning they just shared feeling like a distant dream. Then, something shifted in Richard's expression. He turned to Camille, his eyes blazing with a determination she hadn't seen in years. "Camille, I know I have no right to ask this of you, but I need you, not just as a face to present to the board, but as a partner. The brilliant, fierce woman I fell in love with." He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "I've made so many mistakes, pushed you away when I should have held you close. But if there's any part of you that still believes in us, in what we could be—" Camille felt her heart racing, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Richard, But before she could respond, a commotion from the direction of the house caught their attention. Lucas came running towards them, his face pale with fear. "Mom! Dad! Come quick! There are men in suits talking to Sophia, and they look really angry." The bottom dropped out of Camille's world. In an instant, all the progress they'd made, all the hope they'd rekindled, was overshadowed by the very real danger they faced. Richard's face hardened, his jaw set with grim determination. "Camille, get Lucas inside and lock yourselves in my study. Use the panic room if you have to. I'll get Sophia." As he turned to rush towards the house, Camille grabbed his arm. "No, we do this together. Remember? As a family." Their eyes met, a wordless understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Hand in hand, with Lucas close behind, they raced towards the manor. The idyllic morning had shattered, replaced by a storm of fear and uncertainty. But as they ran, Camille felt a fierce resolve building within her. They had fought their way back to each other, and she'd be damned if she'd let anyone tear them apart again. The Thornton Manor loomed before them, no longer just a symbol of wealth and power, but a battleground where the fate of their family, and perhaps much more, would be decided. As they reached the front steps, Camille squeezed Richard's hand, drawing strength from his touch. Whatever lay beyond those doors, they would face it together. The time for secrets and separation was over. Now was the time for truth, for courage, and for the kind of love that could withstand any storm. "I must insist that you leave immediately," Mr. Jameson was saying, his voice tight with restraint. "Miss, Sophia is a child, and you have no right to—" "Step aside, old man." One of the suits growled, his hand moving ominously towards his jacket. "Get away from my daughter." Richard's voice boomed across the foyer, causing everyone to freeze. Sophia's eyes lit up with relief. "Dad! Mom!" she cried, trying to move towards them. But one of the men gripped her arm tightly. Camille felt a surge of primal rage at the sight of her daughter in the stranger's grasp. Without thinking, she strode forward, her voice low and dangerous. "Take your hands off my child, or I swear to God, you'll regret it." The man holding Sophia smirked, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Mrs. Thornton, I presume? We were just having a friendly chat with your daughter about her father's business practices." Richard stepped up beside Camille, his presence solid and reassuring. "Victor sent you, didn't he? Trying to intimidate my family before the board meeting." The other man, taller and clearly the leader, stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, let's not make this more unpleasant than it needs to be. We have a proposition for you. One that could make all of this unpleasantness go away." Camille felt Lucas pressing against her side, trembling slightly. She wrapped an arm around him protectively, her mind racing. They needed to get the children to safety, but she was loath to leave Richard alone with these thugs. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Hendricks appeared at the top of the stairs. "Children," she called, her voice calm but brooking no argument. "Why don't you come help me prepare some refreshments for our guests?" The men's attention was momentarily diverted, and in that split second, Richard acted. He lunged forward, breaking the grip on Sophia's arm and pushing her towards Camille. "Go with Mrs. Hendricks," he said urgently. "Both of you, now." Camille locked eyes with Richard, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. She nodded, guiding the twins towards the stairs. "It's okay," she murmured, though her heart was pounding. "Everything's going to be okay." As they reached Mrs. Hendricks, the housekeeper whispered, "The panic room, Mrs. Thornton. You remember the way." Camille nodded, grateful for the old woman's quick thinking. With one last glance at Richard, standing tall and defiant in the face of danger, she ushered the children down the hallway. Back in the foyer, Richard's voice carried, steel-edged and unwavering. "Whatever Victor's offering, the answer is no. I won't be bullied, and I sure as hell won't let you threaten my family." The leader's response was lost as Camille and the twins rounded a corner, but the menace in his tone was unmistakable. As they hurried through the manor's winding corridors, Sophia's voice trembled. "Mom, what's happening? Those men, they said Dad was doing bad things, that people could get hurt." Camille's heart clenched. How could she explain the complexities of corporate espionage and ethical dilemmas to a child? "Your father is trying to do something very important, sweetheart. Something that could help a lot of people. But there are those who don't want that to happen." They reached a nondescript panel in the wall of Richard's study. Camille pressed a hidden switch, revealing a state-of-the-art security door. As it slid open, Lucas spoke up, his young face creased with worry. "But Dad's going to be okay, right? Those men won't hurt him." Camille ushered them inside the panic room, her mind whirling with fear and determination. "Your father is very strong and very smart, and he has us now. We're going to help him, all of us together." As the door sealed behind them, Camille took in the high-tech interior of the panic room. Monitors showed feeds from security cameras throughout the manor, including the foyer where Richard still stood, facing down the intruders. Sophia pressed close to her mother's side. "What do we do now, Mom?" Camille's gaze fixed on Richard's image on the screen, her jaw set with resolve. "Now we fight back. Your father's been protecting us all these years. It's time we returned the favor." She moved to the communication panel, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "First, we call for help. Then, we show these men that the Thorntons are not to be trifled with." As Camille initiated a series of encrypted messages, to the police, to trusted allies, to the board members themselves, she felt a surge of fierce pride. They had been brought back together for a reason, and now, in this moment of crisis, she understood why. The Thornton family, once fractured by secrets and fear, was whole again, and together they were a force to be reckoned with. On the monitors, Richard stood unwavering, buying them precious time. And in the safety of the panic room, Camille and the twins prepared for battle, ready to fight for their family, their future, and the truth that could change the world. The next few hours would determine everything, and the Thorntons were ready to face whatever came their way, united at last. "Victor can make all the threats he wants," Richard was saying, his stance unwavering. "But I won't be bullied into giving up what's right for this company and for the world." Suddenly, the main screen flickered, and a new face appeared. a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and cold, calculating eyes. Victor Blackwood, Richard's longtime rival and the mastermind behind the takeover attempt. Richard, Victor's voice oozed false sympathy. Always the idealist. But surely you see now that you're fighting a losing battle? Your family's safety for a pipe dream? Is it really worth it? Camille felt her blood boil at the thinly veiled threat. She turned to the twins, who were watching wide-eyed and frightened. Kids, I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? They nodded solemnly, and Camille's heart swelled with pride. She knelt down to their level, looking them each in the eye. Your father has been working on something incredible, something that could change the world for the better. But there are people who want to stop him, people who care more about money than doing what's right. Sophia, always quick on the uptake, furrowed her brow. Is that why those men were asking me questions about Dad's work? Camille nodded. Yes, sweetheart. They're trying to find any information they can use against your father. Lucas, his young face set with determination, spoke up. So how do we help Dad? There must be something we can do. A plan began to form in Camille's mind. She turned back to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keyboard. We're going to give your father the backup he needs. But I need you both to help me. As Camille worked, she explained her plan to the twins. They would use the panic room's advanced systems to gather evidence of Victor's illegal activities, broadcast the truth to the board members, and turn the tables on their enemies. Meanwhile, on the screen, the confrontation in the foyer was escalating. One of Victor's men had grabbed Richard by the lapels, his face twisted with anger. Enough games, Thornton. Sign over the company now, or we'll make sure your family regrets it. Richard's eyes flashed with a mixture of fury and fear. You lay one hand on them and I swear. But before he could finish, the Manor sound system crackled to life. Camille's voice, strong and clear, filled every room. Attention, everyone. This is Camille Thornton. I have evidence of illegal activities perpetrated by Victor Blackwood and his associates. This evidence is being transmitted to the board members and the authorities as we speak. In the foyer, the intruders looked around in confusion, their grip on Richard loosening. Victor's face on the screen paled visibly. Camille continued, her voice gaining strength. Furthermore, I have here with me the complete files on the clean energy technology that Richard has been protecting. A technology that could revolutionize the world, but that certain parties have tried to suppress. She paused, her eyes meeting Richard's through the camera. Richard, my love, you're not alone in this fight anymore. We stand with you as a family and as partners. The twins' voices joined in, their young voices filled with conviction. We believe in you, Dad, Sophia called out. We're not afraid, Lucas added. We're Thorntons and Thorntons stick together. Richard's face transformed, a mix of awe, love, and renewed determination washing over him. He straightened up, shrugging off the grip of Victor's henchmen. You heard my wife, he said, his voice steady and powerful. Your game is over, Victor. The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not. As if on cue, the sound of police sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Victor's men looked at each other in panic, their tough facades crumbling. Victor's image on the screen contorted with rage. This isn't over, Thornton. You'll regret this. I promise you. The feed cut out abruptly, leaving only static in its wake. In the panic room, Camille let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She gathered the twins in her arms, hugging them tightly. You were so brave, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Both of you. As the sounds of the police entering the manor reached them, Sophia looked up at her mother, her eyes shining. Mom, does this mean we won? Camille smiled, a mixture of relief and cautious optimism washing over her. It means we've won this battle, sweetheart. But I have a feeling our fight is far from over. She stood up, squaring her shoulders. Come on, let's go join your father. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together as a family. As they emerged from the panic room, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain. The Thorntons were no longer a fractured family hiding from their past. They were a force to be reckoned with, united in their love for each other and their determination to make the world a better place. The manor, which had once felt like a gilded cage, now buzzed with the energy of new beginnings and hard-won victories. And as Camille led her children towards the foyer, towards Richard and their shared future, she felt a sense of purpose and belonging that she had thought lost forever. The road ahead would be challenging, but they would walk it together, hand in hand, stronger than ever before. Richard sat behind his desk, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. He gazed at Camille and the twins with a mixture of pride and amazement. "I still can't believe what you all did," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "You saved everything, the company, the technology, our family." Camille perched on the edge of the desk, her hand finding Richard's. "We did it together," she said softly. "The way it always should have been." Sophia, ever curious, piped up from her spot on the leather sofa. "Dad, what happens now? With the company and the secret technology?" Richard's face grew serious as he considered the question. "Well, sweetheart, that's something we need to discuss as a family. The technology we've developed, it could change the world. But it also comes with great responsibility." Lucas leaned forward, his young face creased with concern. "But those bad men, Victor and his friends, they'll try to stop us again, won't they?" A heavy silence fell over the room as the reality of their situation sank in. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Camille squeezed Richard's hand, drawing strength from his touch. "Your father's right. This is a decision we need to make together. But before we do, there's something you children need to understand." She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "The world isn't always a fair place. There are people out there who will try to stop progress, to keep things the way they are because it benefits them. What your father has created, it threatens a lot of powerful people." Richard nodded, his eyes meeting Camille's with a look of shared understanding. "If we choose to move forward with this, to release the technology to the world, our lives will change forever. We'll be facing challenges and dangers we can't even imagine." The twins exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice small but determined. "But if it can help people, if it can make the world better, isn't it worth it?" Lucas nodded in agreement. "We're Thorntons. We don't back down from a fight, right?" Richard's eyes misted over with pride and emotion. He stood up, moving around the desk to kneel in front of his children. "You're right. We don't back down. But I need you both to understand what this could mean. We might have to leave this house, change our names, live a very different kind of life. Are you prepared for that?" The gravity of the situation hung in the air as the twins considered their father's words. Camille felt her heart swell with love and fear in equal measure. They were asking so much of their children, but she knew in her heart that this was bigger than just their family. After what felt like an eternity, Sophia and Lucas looked at each other, then back at their parents. With a maturity that belied their years, they nodded in unison. "We're ready," Sophia said firmly. "Whatever it takes," Lucas added. Camille felt tears prick at her eyes as she joined her family, wrapping her arms around them all. "Then we do this together," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "No more secrets, no more separation. Whatever comes next, we face it as a family." Richard stood, drawing them all into a tight embrace. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, his voice choked with feeling. "Any of you, but I promise, from this moment on, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love and your trust." As they stood there, united in their resolve, a knock at the study door broke the moment. Mr. Jameson entered, his usual composure slightly ruffled. "I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but there's a call for you." "It's the president." A ripple of shock went through the room. Richard straightened, his face a mix of determination and apprehension. "Thank you, Jameson. I'll take it in here." As Richard moved to answer the call, Camille gathered the twins close. They watched as he picked up the phone, his voice steady as he said, "Mr. President, thank you for calling. Yes, I understand the gravity of the situation. No, sir, I haven't made any decisions yet. But I think it's time we had a serious discussion about the future of energy in this country and the world. The Thornton family stood on the precipice of a new chapter, one filled with untold challenges and possibilities. The manor, once a symbol of their fractured past, now felt like a launching pad for a future they would forge together. As Richard continued his conversation with the president, Camille looked at her children, seeing the mix of excitement and trepidation in their eyes. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous. But as she stood there, surrounded by the love and strength of her family, she felt a sense of hope and purpose that she had thought lost forever. Whatever storms lay on the horizon, they would weather them together. The Thorntons were no longer running from their past or hiding from the world. They were stepping into the light, ready to fight for a better future, and not just for themselves, but for everyone. The adventure that lay ahead was only beginning, and as a family, they were ready to face it head-on. Camille curled up on the plush sofa, a steaming mug of tea cradled in her hands. The twins sat on the thick carpet, their young faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Richard paced by the fireplace, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "So," Sophia ventured, breaking the silence. "What did the president say, Dad?" Richard paused, turning to face his family. His eyes met Camille's, seeking strength and reassurance. She nodded slightly, encouraging him to share. "Well," he began, his voice low and serious, "the president understands the potential of our technology. He wants to help us bring it to the world. But what, Dad?" Lucas prompted, leaning forward. Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But there are complications. Political pressures, international concerns. It's not as simple as just announcing it to the world." Camille set down her mug, her eyes never leaving Richard's face. "What aren't you telling us, Richard?" He hesitated, then seemed to deflate slightly. "The president believes that if we go public with this now, it could destabilize global markets. There are countries, powerful countries, that would see our technology as a threat to their economies." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sophia's small voice broke the tension. "So, what do we do?" Richard moved to sit beside Camille, drawing strength from her presence. "That's what we need to decide. As a family." Camille reached out, taking his hand in hers. "What are our options?" Richard squeezed her hand, grateful for her support. "We have 3 choices," he said, addressing them all. "First, we can go ahead and release the technology, consequences be damned. It would be the quickest way to make a change, but it could also be the most dangerous." The twins exchanged worried glances, but remained silent, listening intently. "Second," Richard continued, "we can work with the government, slowly introducing the technology in controlled phases. It would be safer, but it could take years, maybe decades, to fully implement." Lucas frowned. "But wouldn't that mean people who need help now wouldn't get it?" Richard nodded, pride glimmering in his eyes at his son's insight. "Exactly. Which brings us to our third option." He paused, taking a deep breath. "We go underground. We take the technology and disappear. We find a way to distribute it quietly to those who need it most, while staying off the radar of those who would try to stop us." The room fell silent once more, the weight of the decision pressing down on them all. Camille's mind raced, considering the implications of each choice. She looked at her children, seeing the same mix of fear and determination she felt in her own heart. "It would mean leaving everything behind," she said softly. "This house, our lives, everything we know." Sophia stood up, her young face set with a resolve beyond her years. "But we'd be together, right? And we'd be helping people." Richard nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart, we'd be together. And we'd be trying to make the world a better place." Lucas joined his sister, standing tall. "Then I think we should do it. Go underground, it's like in the movies, right? We'd be like secret heroes." Despite the gravity of the situation, Camille couldn't help but smile at her son's enthusiasm. She turned to Richard, seeing the question in his eyes. "What do you think, love?" he asked softly. Camille took a deep breath, looking around at the faces of her family. In that moment, she saw not just her husband and children, but the future they could build together. A future where they used their privilege and resources to make real change in the world. "I think," she said slowly, "that we have an opportunity here, an opportunity to do something truly meaningful. It won't be easy, and it will be dangerous. But if we're together, we can face anything," Richard finished, a smile breaking across his face. The twins cheered, the tension in the room breaking as they rushed to hug their parents. As Camille held her family close, she felt a surge of love and determination. They were about to embark on the greatest adventure of their lives, leaving behind the world they knew for an uncertain future. But as she looked into Richard's eyes, seeing the same mix of fear and excitement she felt, she knew they were making the right choice. The Thorntons were no longer just a wealthy family hiding behind manor walls. They were becoming something more, a force for change, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. As the night deepened outside, the family began to plan their new life. There was much to do, resources to gather, contacts to make, a new identity to forge. But with each passing moment, their resolve strengthened. The Thornton Manor, once a symbol of their fractured past, now hummed with the energy of new beginnings. And as they talked long into the night, mapping out their daring escape and their plans for the future, one thing became clear. The greatest adventure of their lives was just beginning, and they would face it together, as a family united in purpose and love. Camille stood in the foyer, her heart heavy with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She watched as Richard had a hushed conversation with Mr. Jameson, the faithful butler's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've been more than a servant, Jameson," Richard was saying, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been family. I hate to ask this of you, but—" "Say no more, sir," Jameson interrupted, straightening his posture. "I'll ensure the manor appears lived in. No one will suspect you've gone until it's far too late." Sophia tugged at Camille's sleeve, her young face creased with worry. "Mom, are you sure we can't tell Grandma and Grandpa where we're going?" Camille knelt down, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "I know it's hard, sweetheart, but the fewer people who know, the safer we'll all be. We'll find a way to let them know we're okay. I promise." Lucas joined them, his backpack looking comically large on his small frame. "It's like we're spies in a movie, right? Going undercover to save the world." Despite the gravity of the situation, Camille couldn't help but smile at her son's enthusiasm. "Something like that, darling. But remember, this isn't a game. We have to be very careful." Richard approached, laying a hand on Camille's shoulder. The touch was electric, filled with unspoken fears and shared determination. "It's time," he said softly. The cars waiting at the end of the drive. As they stepped out onto the front steps of Thornton Manor for what might be the last time, the cool morning air sent a shiver down Camille's spine. She turned to take one last look at the home that had seen so much of their family's history. The joys, the sorrows, the fractures, and now, finally, their reunion. Mrs. Hendricks appeared in the doorway, her weathered face a mask of concern and pride. "You take care of each other out there," she said, her voice wavering. "And remember, no matter where you go, you'll always have a home here." The twins rushed to hug the old housekeeper, and Camille felt tears pricking at her eyes. This wasn't just goodbye to a house. It was farewell to a life they had known, to the people who had been their support system for so long. As they made their way down the long driveway, the gravel crunching beneath their feet, an owl hooted in the distance. The sound felt like a farewell from the estate itself. Halfway down the drive, Sophia suddenly stopped. "Wait!" she cried, her voice tinged with panic. "I forgot something." Before anyone could stop her, she turned and sprinted back towards the house. Camille's heart leapt into her throat. "Sophia!" she called out, ready to chase after her daughter. Richard caught her arm. "Let her go," he said softly. "We have a few minutes. This is hard for all of us." Moments later, Sophia returned, clutching something to her chest. As she drew closer, Camille saw it was the small silver picture frame from Richard's study, the one with the photo of their family, taken just after the twins were born. "We can't leave this behind," Sophia said, her eyes shining with determination. "It's us, all of us, together." Richard knelt down, pulling his daughter into a tight embrace. "You're right, sweetheart," he murmured. "That's exactly what we need to take with us." As they reached the end of the driveway, a nondescript sedan waited for them, its engine humming quietly. The driver, a trusted associate of Richard's, nodded silently as they approached. Camille took one last look at Thornton Manor, its grand silhouette etched against the lightning sky. So many memories, so much history. But as she turned back to her family, seeing the love and determination in their eyes, she knew that their true home wasn't a place, it was each other. "Ready?" Richard asked, his hand finding hers. Camille squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his touch. "Ready," she replied. As they climbed into the car, the twins settled in the back seat, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. The engine revved, and they began to move, leaving behind the only world they had ever known. Camille felt a lump form in her throat as they passed through the gates of the estate. They were leaving behind so much, venturing into a future fraught with danger and uncertainty. But as she looked at Richard, at their beautiful children, she felt a surge of hope. They were the Thorntons, united, strong, and ready to change the world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As a family, the car picked up speed, heading towards the rising sun. Behind them, Thornton Manor grew smaller in the rearview mirror, a chapter of their lives closing. But ahead of them stretched an open road, full of possibilities and the promise of a new beginning. Camille sat in the front passenger seat, her eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, watching her children's faces. Sophia clutched the silver picture frame to her chest, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. Lucas, always the more restless of the twins, fidgeted in his seat, his young mind clearly wrestling with their new reality. Richard's hand found Camille's, his touch a silent reassurance. She squeezed back, grateful for the connection. "How long until we reach the safe house?" Sophia's small voice broke the silence. Richard turned slightly in his seat. "A few more hours, sweetheart. We need to make sure we're not being followed." Lucas perked up at this, his eyes widening. "Do you think they're chasing us already, Dad? Like in the spy movies?" Camille saw a flicker of concern cross Richard's face before he managed a reassuring smile. "No, son. We're being careful, that's all. Remember, this isn't a game." The car fell silent again, the weight of their situation hanging heavy in the air. Camille's mind raced, thinking of all they'd left behind: their home, their friends, their entire way of life. She glanced at Richard, seeing the tension in his jaw, the worry lines creasing his forehead. "Richard," she said softly, "maybe we should tell them more. They deserve to know what we're facing." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right, kids. There's something your mother and I need to explain." The twins leaned forward, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Richard's voice was steady as he began. "The technology we're protecting, it's not just about clean energy. It has the potential to completely change the way the world works, to take power away from those who have been misusing it for years." Sophia's brow furrowed. "Is that why those bad men were after us? Because they don't want things to change?" "That's right, sweetheart," Camille answered, her heart swelling with pride at her daughter's perception. "There are people who benefit from the way things are now, even if it hurts others or damages the planet. They'll do anything to keep their power." Lucas sat up straighter, his young face set with determination. "But we're going to stop them, right? That's why we're running. So we can fight back." Richard's eyes met Camille's, a silent conversation passing between them. How much should they reveal? How much could their children handle? "We're going to try," Richard said carefully. "But it won't be easy. We'll be facing powerful enemies, and we'll have to be very careful. That's why it's so important that we stick together, that we trust each other completely." As if on cue, The car suddenly swerved, causing them all to lurch in their seats. The driver, who had been silent until now, spoke urgently. "Mr. Thornton, we've got company. Black SUV, 2 cars back. They're gaining on us." Camille's heart leapt into her throat as she twisted in her seat, confirming the driver's words. A sleek black vehicle was indeed closing the distance, its tinted windows hiding the occupants from view. "Richard?" she breathed, fear evident in her voice. He nodded grimly. "I see them. Kids, I need you to stay calm and do exactly as I say. We've prepared for this." The twins' eyes were wide with fear, but they nodded bravely. Sophia clutched the picture frame tighter, while Lucas's hand found his sister's, squeezing it reassuringly. Richard turned to the driver. "Plan B, John. Take the next exit." As the car accelerated, veering off the main road onto a narrow country lane, Camille felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, their new life was beginning in earnest, with all its dangers and uncertainties. She looked back at her children, seeing the mixture of fear and excitement in their eyes. In that moment, she made a silent vow. No matter what happened, no matter what challenges they faced, she would protect her family. They had chosen this path together, and together they would see it through. The car sped down the winding lane, the black SUV still in pursuit. But as they crested a hill, Camille saw something that made her heart skip a beat. A small airfield, with a private plane waiting on the runway. "Richard," she gasped. "Is that?" He nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Our ticket to a new life. Hold on, everyone. This is where our real journey begins." As they raced towards the airfield, the future, stretching out before them like an uncharted map, Camille felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. They were leaving behind everything they knew, diving headfirst into a world of danger and uncertainty. But as she looked at her family, Richard's determined face, the twins' brave expressions, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The Thorntons were no longer running from their past. They were charging towards a future they would shape with their own hands. The plane waited, its engines already rumbling to life. As they approached, Camille sent up a silent prayer, not for safety, but for strength. The strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and the courage to keep fighting for what was right, no matter the cost. Their greatest adventure was just beginning, and the world would never be the same. As the plane lifted off, leaving behind the pursuing black SUV, Lucas let out a whoop of excitement. "We did it! We escaped! Shoo!" Sophia hushed him, her eyes wide. "It's not over yet, is it, Dad?" Richard turned in his seat, his face a mask of determination tinged with worry. "No, sweetheart, it's not. This is just the beginning." Camille leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "Richard, where are we going? You never told me the final destination." He met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and apology. "I couldn't, Camille. The less any of us knew, the safer we all were. But now," he took a deep breath, "we're headed to a small island in the South Pacific. It's off the grid, unknown to most of the world." "An island?" Lucas perked up, his earlier fear forgotten in a burst of childish enthusiasm. "Like in Robinson Crusoe?" Despite the gravity of the situation, Camille couldn't help but smile at her son's innocence. "Not quite like that, darling, but it will be very different from what we're used to." As the plane leveled off, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Mr. Thornton, we've successfully evaded pursuit. ETA to refueling point is 3 hours. Richard nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. He turned to his family, his expression softening. "I know this is all happening so fast, and I'm sorry for that, but I need you all to understand something." He paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "What we're doing, it's bigger than us. The technology we're protecting could change the world, save millions of lives. But it also puts us in great danger." Sophia, always quick to understand, spoke up. "Because the bad people don't want the world to change, right? They want to keep things the way they are, even if it hurts people." Camille felt a surge of pride at her daughter's insight. "That's right, sweetheart. But we're going to fight to make things better, aren't we? The twins nodded solemnly, their young faces set with determination that seemed beyond their years. Richard continued, his voice growing stronger. On this island, we'll have a chance to develop the technology further, to find ways to distribute it safely to those who need it most. But it won't be easy. We'll be cut off from the world we know, facing challenges we can't even imagine yet. Camille reached out, taking his hand in hers. But we'll face them together as a family. For a moment, the cabin fell silent, the gravity of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Then Lucas spoke up, his voice small but determined. Mom, Dad, I'm scared, but I'm also excited. It's like we're going to be heroes in our own story. Isn't it? Camille felt tears prick at her eyes. She pulled her son close, wrapping an arm around Sophia as well. Yes, my brave boy, we are going to be heroes. But remember, being a hero isn't about fame or glory. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. As the plane soared over endless expanses of ocean, Camille gazed out the window, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. They were leaving behind everything they had ever known, their home, their friends, their entire way of life. But as she looked at her family, saw the love and determination in their eyes, she knew they were gaining something far more precious. They were no longer the fractured, distant family they had been just days ago. They were united now, bound by a common purpose and a love that had been tested and found unbreakable. The island lay ahead, a blank slate upon which they would write their new story. A story of courage, of sacrifice, and of a family willing to risk everything to make the world a better place. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Camille felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they might face, they would face them together. The Thorntons were no longer running from their past. They were flying towards a future they would shape with their own hands, their own hearts, and their unwavering belief in each other. Their greatest adventure was just beginning, and the world would never be the same. Look! Sophia exclaimed, her face pressed against the window. It's so green. Lucas joined his sister, eyes wide with wonder. Are those palm trees? And is that a volcano? Richard chuckled, the sound a welcome relief after hours of tense silence. Yes, that's an extinct volcano. It's part of what makes this island so special and so hidden. As the plane touched down on a narrow airstrip carved into the jungle, Camille reached for Richard's hand. Are you sure about this? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the engines. Once we step off this plane, Richard squeezed her hand, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. There's no turning back, I know. But Camille, this is our chance to make a real difference. To give our children a future worth fighting for. The plane came to a stop, and for a moment the family sat in silence, the weight of their decision hanging heavy in the air. Then, with a hiss, the cabin door opened, and a rush of warm, fragrant air filled the plane. Well, Camille said, taking a deep breath, shall we? As they stepped onto the tarmac, the humidity enveloped them like a warm blanket. The twins looked around in awe, taking in the lush vegetation and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. A figure emerged from the treeline, a tall, weathered man with sun-bleached hair and piercing blue eyes. He approached with an easy stride, a welcoming smile on his face. Richard Thornton, he called out, his accent a mix of American and something else, something shaped by years of island living. Welcome to your new home. Richard stepped forward, shaking the man's hand. Dr. Emerson, thank you for everything you've done to prepare for our arrival. Dr. Emerson's gaze swept over the family, his expression softening as he took in the twins' wide-eyed wonder. It's my pleasure, and please call me Jack. We don't stand on ceremony here. As introductions were made, Camille found herself studying their new surroundings more closely. Beyond the clearing, she could make out the outline of buildings nestled among the trees, a perfect blend of modern technology and natural camouflage. It's incredible, she breathed. How long have you been here, Jack? The scientist's eyes crinkled with a mixture of pride and something deeper, almost melancholy. Going on 15 years now. This island, it changes you, makes you see the world differently. As they began to walk towards the hidden compound, Lucas tugged at Richard's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, though in the quiet of the island, his voice carried. "Are there other kids here?" A shadow passed over Jack's face, so quickly Camille almost missed it. "There are a few families here," he said carefully. "But I won't lie to you, it's a small community, very focused." Sophia, always perceptive, picked up on the undercurrent of tension. Focused on what exactly? Richard and Jack exchanged a look, and Camille felt a chill run down her spine despite the tropical heat. There was so much they still didn't know, so many secrets yet to be revealed. "On changing the world," Richard said finally, his voice firm. "On making sure the technology we've developed gets to the people who need it most, without falling into the wrong hands." As they reached the edge of the compound, a sleek, modern building came into view, its glass walls reflecting the lush greenery surrounding it. "This is our main research facility," Jack explained, "where we'll be working to refine and expand on Richard's initial breakthroughs." Camille watched as her husband's eyes lit up with excitement and purpose. This was his element, his passion, the work he'd sacrificed so much for. But as she looked at her children, saw the mixture of awe and uncertainty on their faces, she felt a pang of doubt. "And where will we be living?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Jack gestured to a cluster of smaller buildings partially hidden by the foliage. "We've prepared a home for you there. It's comfortable, secure, everything you'll need." As they made their way towards their new home, Camille felt a whirlwind of emotions. Excitement at the possibilities that lay before them, fear of the unknown challenges they would face, and a deep, aching love for her family, who had given up everything to embark on this dangerous, world-changing adventure. Just before they reached the house, Richard pulled her aside, his eyes searching her face. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I know this is a lot to take in." Camille took a deep breath, looking out at the paradise that was to be their new home and their new prison. "I'm scared, Richard," she admitted, "but I'm also hopeful. Whatever happens, we're in this together now." He pulled her close, and for a moment, they stood there, drawing strength from each other. Then, with a shared nod of determination, they turned to join their children at the threshold of their new life. As they stepped into their island home, Camille couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The real challenges, the true tests of their family's strength and unity, were yet to come. But as she watched her children explore their new surroundings with growing excitement, as she felt Richard's steady presence beside her, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever the future held, the Thorntons would face it together. Their greatest adventure and their greatest battle was just beginning. One balmy evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Camille found herself on the porch of their new home. She watched as Richard and the twins played an impromptu game of catch on the beach, their laughter carried on the warm breeze. Jack approached, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, offering her one of the cups. Camille accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling its rich aroma. "Just reflecting," she said softly. "It's been a month already. Sometimes it feels like we've been here forever, and other times it feels like you just stepped off that plane." Jack finished for her, his eyes understanding. He leaned against the railing, his gaze following hers to the beach. "They seem to be adapting well," he observed. Camille nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "They're resilient, but I worry about them. The isolation, the secrecy. It's a lot for children to bear." Jack was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost apologetic. "Camille, there's something you should know. Something Richard and I have been discussing." A chill ran down her spine despite the warm evening air. "What is it, Jack?" He turned to face her, his expression grave. "We've detected some unusual activity. Satellite scans, increased chatter on certain channels. We think they might be closing in on us." Camille felt her heart drop. "Who? Victor's people?" Jack shook his head. "Worse. We believe it's a coalition of government agencies and corporate interests. They've pooled their resources to track us down." "But how?" Camille gasped, her mind racing. "We were so careful." "Technology is a double-edged sword," Jack said grimly. "The very advancements we're working on to save the world, they can also be used to find us." As if on cue, Richard looked up from the beach, catching Camille's eye. Something in her expression must have alerted him, for he quickly ushered the twins back towards the house. "What do we do?" Camille asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's eyes were filled with a mixture of determination and regret. "We have contingencies in place. But Camille, you need to understand, things are going to change. Again. And this time, it might be even harder." Richard and the children bounded up the steps, their faces flushed with exertion and joy. But as they took in the serious expressions of Camille and Jack, the mood shifted palpably. "What's wrong?" Sophia asked, her young face creasing with concern. Richard looked between Jack and Camille, understanding dawning in his eyes. "It's time, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Jack nodded solemnly. "I'm afraid so. We need to move to phase 2. Lucas, always quick to pick up on tension, stepped closer to Camille. "Mom? What's phase 2? Camille pulled her son close, her arm wrapping around Sophia as well. She looked to Richard, seeing the conflict in his eyes, the desire to protect his family warring with the need to continue their vital work. "Phase 2, Richard began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation, "is where we take our work underground." "Literally." Sophia's eyes widened. "You mean?" Jack nodded, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice despite the circumstances. "Beneath this island lies a network of caves and tunnels. We've been preparing them, turning them into a state-of-the-art research facility and living quarters. It's our ultimate fallback position." "Like a secret base in a spy movie?" Lucas asked, a mix of fear and excitement in his voice. "Something like that, kiddo," Richard said, ruffling his son's hair. "But this isn't a game. If we have to move down there, it means the danger is very real." Camille felt a surge of emotions, fear for her family's safety, pride in their resilience, and a fierce determination to see this through. "How long do we have?" she asked Jack. "A few days, maybe a week to prepare," he replied. "We'll start moving essential equipment tonight." As the reality of their situation sank in, Camille looked out at the beautiful island that had been their home for the past month, the paradise that was about to become their fortress. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Richard said softly, coming to stand beside her. "But what we're doing, it's worth it, isn't it?" Camille turned to her family, her brilliant, determined husband, her brave, adaptable children, even Jack, who had become a trusted friend and ally. She saw in their eyes the same mixture of fear and resolve that she felt in her own heart. "Yes," she said firmly, drawing strength from their unity. "It's worth it. Whatever comes next, we face it together." As the last light faded from the sky, the Thorntons stood together on the porch, a family united in purpose and love. The idyllic chapter of their island life was coming to an end, but a new one filled with even greater challenges and potential triumphs was about to begin. The world above might be closing in, but deep beneath the island, a new frontier awaited, and the Thorntons were ready to face it head-on, armed with their revolutionary technology and the unbreakable bonds of family. Their underground adventure was about to begin, and with it, the next phase of their fight to change the world. Sophia clutched Camille's hand tightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Mom," she whispered, "it's like we're on a spaceship." Lucas, always the more adventurous of the twins, bounced ahead excitedly. "This is so cool. Do we get our own secret labs? Can I have a robot assistant?" Richard chuckled, though Camille could see the tension in his shoulders. "Not quite, buddy. But I promise, you'll have plenty to explore down here." As they reached a large, circular chamber that seemed to be the heart of the underground complex, Jack turned to face them. "Welcome to Sanctuary," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "This will be our home and our base of operations for as long as necessary." Camille took in the sight before her, state-of-the-art computer terminals, holographic displays, and equipment she couldn't even begin to identify. It was impressive, to be sure, but also a stark reminder of the gravity of their situation. "How long have you been preparing this?" she asked, her voice hushed with awe and a touch of fear. Jack's eyes met hers, a mix of pride and something darker, more haunted. "Years. We always knew this day might come. The work we're doing. It's too important, too dangerous to leave unprotected." Richard moved to one of the terminals, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Instantly, the largest screen in the chamber came to life, displaying a world map covered in pulsing red dots. "These are all the places where our technology could make an immediate impact," he explained, his voice tight with emotion. "Drought-stricken regions that could be saved with our water purification systems. Areas suffering from energy poverty that our miniaturized reactors could transform overnight." Camille felt her heart swell with pride and determination. This was why they had sacrificed everything, for the chance to make a real difference in the world. But as she watched her children take in their new surroundings, a flicker of doubt crept in. "Richard," she said softly, pulling him aside, "are we doing the right thing? Bringing the kids into this war?" Richard's eyes met hers, filled with a complex mixture of love, guilt, and resolve. "I ask myself that every day," he admitted. "But Camille, think about the world they'd inherit if we didn't do this. A world of scarcity, conflict, environmental collapse. We're fighting for their future, for everyone's future." Before Camille could respond, an alarm blared through the chamber. Jack rushed to a nearby console, his face grim. "We've got incoming," he announced, his voice tight. "Multiple aircraft approaching the island. Military grade by the looks of it." The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted from wonder to high alert. Richard sprang into action, barking orders to the small team of scientists and technicians who had joined them underground. "Initiate blackout protocols. Shut down all surface operations and seal the entrances." Camille gathered the twins close, her heart racing. "What's happening?" Sophia asked, her voice small and frightened. "Remember how we talked about bad people who might try to stop our work?" Camille explained, trying to keep her voice calm. "Well, they might have found us, but we're safe down here." Lucas's eyes were wide. "Are they going to bomb the island? Like in the movies?" Jack overheard and shook his head firmly. "No, son. They want what we have too badly to destroy it. But they'll search every inch of this island to find us." As if to emphasize his point, a deep rumble echoed through the cavern, the sound of distant explosions on the surface. Richard turned to his family, his face set with determination. "This is it. The moment we've been preparing for. Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed. It all comes down to what we do next." Camille felt a surge of emotions, fear for her family's safety, anger at those who would threaten them, and a fierce, burning resolve to see their mission through. "What do we do?" she asked, standing tall beside her husband. Richard's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she saw all the love, trust, and shared purpose that had brought them to this point. "We fight," he said simply, "not with weapons, but with our minds, our technology, our determination to make the world a better place." As the sounds of the search above grew louder, the Thornton family stood united in the heart of their underground sanctuary. They were no longer running, no longer hiding. They were making their stand. Sophia and Lucas, sensing the gravity of the moment, stood a little straighter, their young faces set with a determination beyond their years. "We're ready, Dad," Sophia said, her voice steady. "Yeah," Lucas chimed in. "Let's save the world." And as the first stages of their counterplan began to unfold on the screens around them, Camille felt a fierce pride in her family. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they might face, they would face them together. The Thorntons were no longer just a family in hiding. They were a force for change, a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the brink. And from their underground sanctuary, they were about to launch a revolution that would shake the foundations of power across the globe. The real battle was just beginning, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. Richard stood at the central console, his fingers flying over holographic displays as he coordinated their defense and counterattack. Camille worked beside him, her years of business acumen now focused on managing their resources and planning their next moves. "We need to get the word out," Camille said urgently. "If we can make the world aware of what's happening here, it might buy us some protection." Richard nodded grimly. "Agreed, but we have to be careful. One wrong move and we could expose ourselves completely." As they debated their options, Sophia approached, her young face set with determination. "Dad, Mom, I think I have an idea." They turned to her, curious. Sophia had always been the more thoughtful of the twins, and her insights often surprised them. "What if we use social media?" she suggested. "Not directly, but through a network of trusted contacts. We could start a grassroots campaign, get people talking about clean energy and corporate corruption without revealing our location." Richard's eyes widened, a spark of excitement lighting up his face. "That's brilliant, sweetheart. A decentralized information campaign. It could work." As they began to flesh out the plan, Lucas burst into the room, out of breath and eyes wild with excitement. "Mom, Dad, you've got to see this." He led them to another section of the facility where Jack and a team of engineers were huddled around a strange, pulsing device. "We've done it," Jack announced, his voice filled with awe. "The quantum entanglement communicator is online. We can now send instantaneous, untraceable messages anywhere in the world." The implications of this breakthrough hit Camille like a thunderbolt. With this technology, they could coordinate their efforts globally without fear of interception. As the team celebrated this small victory, an alarm blared through the facility. One of the technicians called out, panic in her voice. "They've found one of the hidden entrances. They're trying to break through." The mood in the room instantly shifted from jubilation to high alert. Richard turned to his family, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Camille, get the kids to the safe room," he ordered. "I need to stay here and coordinate our defenses." But Sophia and Lucas stood their ground, their young faces set with determination that belied their years. "No, Dad," Sophia said firmly. "We're in this together, remember? We can help." Lucas nodded vigorously. "Yeah, I've been studying the facility's layout. I think I know a way we can throw them off our trail." Camille felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. Her children were showing incredible bravery, but the danger was all too